Jet Airways, once the king of the Indian skies, now finds itself grounded, buried under a mountain of debt. Years of mismanagement, rising fuel prices, and fierce competition pushed the airline into a financial tailspin. By 2019, Jet Airways was gasping for air, its wings clipped by massive losses and a dwindling fleet. The airline, once a symbol of Indian aviation, was forced to shut down its operations, leaving thousands of employees jobless and passengers stranded. A glimmer of hope emerged from the wreckage, a resolution plan. This plan, a lifeline for the struggling airline, aimed to bring in new investors, restructure the company, and ultimately get Jet Airways back in the air. The resolution plan, however, quickly became a battleground, with various stakeholders vying for control of the airline. What followed was a high-stakes legal drama, with creditors, investors, and the Indian judicial system all playing a part. At the heart of this drama was the State Bank of India, SBI, Jet Airways' biggest lender. SBI, along with a consortium of other banks, had a significant stake in the airline's future. They argued that their claims on Jet Airways' assets should be prioritized, given the massive sums of money the airline owed them. On the other side of the tarmac stood the Jalan-Kalrock Consortium, JKC, a group of investors who had emerged as the winning bidders in the resolution process. The stage was set for a showdown. The fate of Jet Airways, once a symbol of Indian aviation, now hung precariously in the balance, caught between creditors demanding their due and investors hoping to revive the grounded giant. The battle for Jet Airways was more than just a financial squabble. It was a high-stakes game of chicken, with the future of the airline hanging in the balance. On one side of the runway stood the consortium of lenders, led by the formidable State Bank of India, SBI. SBI, having poured billions of rupees into keeping Jet Airways afloat, felt entitled to a significant portion of the pie. Their claim rested on the massive debt the airline had accumulated, a debt that threatened to send ripples through the Indian banking system. Facing off against the banks was the Jalan-Kalrock Consortium, JKC, a group of investors armed with a resolution plan and a dream of resurrecting Jet Airways. JKC, having emerged victorious from the resolution process, argued that their plan offered the best hope for the airline's revival. They promised to inject much-needed capital, restructure the company, and ultimately return Jet Airways to its former glory. The consortium envisioned a future where Jet Airways would once again soar through the skies, a symbol of Indian ambition and resilience. The clash between SBI and JKC was a clash of ideologies, a battle between the old and the new. SBI, representing the cautious, risk-averse nature of traditional banking, wanted to minimize their losses and recover as much of their money as possible. They viewed the resolution plan with skepticism, wary of throwing good money after bad. JKC, on the other hand, represented a new breed of investors, willing to take calculated risks and bet on the future. They saw an opportunity to turn around a struggling asset, to breathe life back into a fallen giant. The battle lines were drawn, the stakes were high, and the future of Jet Airways remained uncertain. The airline, once a source of national pride, was now a pawn in a high-stakes game of financial chess, its fate resting on the outcome of this clash of titans. The State Bank of India, or SBI, the country's largest lender and the lead creditor in the Jet Airways saga, flexed its financial muscle. SBI, along with the other lenders, argued that their claim on Jet Airways' assets superseded all others. After all, they had poured billions of rupees into the struggling airline, hoping to keep it airborne. Now, with Jet Airways grounded, the banks were determined to recoup their losses. Their argument rested on the cold, hard numbers. Jet Airways owed its creditors a staggering sum, a debt that dwarfed the airline's assets. SBI, bearing the brunt of this financial burden, pushed for a resolution plan that prioritized the repayment of these debts. Their stance was clear: secure the bank's financial interests first, and then, if anything remained, consider the interests of other stakeholders. The bank's approach was pragmatic, perhaps even ruthless, but it reflected the harsh realities of the business world. Sentimentality had no place in this high-stakes game. The banks, entrusted with safeguarding their depositors' money, could not afford to be swayed by emotional appeals. Their focus remained unwavering: minimize losses, protect their interests, and send a clear message to other borrowers. The bank's hardline stance, however, was met with resistance. Some argued that their approach lacked vision, that it failed to consider the larger picture. Reviving Jet Airways, they argued, would not only save thousands of jobs, but also preserve a valuable national asset. The banks, however, remained unconvinced. They had heard it all before: the promises of turnaround, the assurances of future profits. They had seen the numbers, the ever-growing debt, the shrinking market share. The battle for Jet Airways quickly escalated from a boardroom brawl to a full-blown legal dogfight, with the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, or NCLAT, emerging as the battleground. This specialized tribunal, established to handle corporate disputes, became the arena where SBI and JKC locked horns, their legal teams battling it out over the fate of the grounded airline. The NCLAT, tasked with overseeing the resolution process, found itself navigating a complex web of claims, counterclaims, and legal maneuvering. The NCLAT's initial ruling seemed to tip the scales in favor of the Jalan-Kalrock Consortium, or JKC. The tribunal, recognizing the need to revive the airline and protect the interests of all stakeholders, approved JKC's resolution plan. This plan, the tribunal argued, offered the best hope for Jet Airways' revival, promising to inject much-needed capital and breathe life back into the grounded airline. The NCLAT's decision, however, was far from the final word in this protracted saga. SBI, unwilling to relinquish its claim, appealed the NCLAT's ruling, taking the battle to the Supreme Court of India, the country's highest judicial authority. SBI argued that the NCLAT had erred in its judgment, that it had failed to adequately consider the bank's claims and the significant financial risks involved. The Supreme Court, recognizing the complexity of the case and its implications for the Indian aviation industry, agreed to hear SBI's appeal. The legal wrangling surrounding Jet Airways highlighted the challenges of resolving complex corporate insolvencies. The NCLAT, despite its specialized mandate, found itself grappling with competing interests, balancing the rights of creditors against the need to revive a struggling company. The tribunal's rulings, often subject to interpretation and legal challenges, underscored the need for clarity and consistency in India's insolvency resolution process. The Supreme Court of India, the final arbiter in the Jet Airways saga, entered the fray. The court, known for its independence and its willingness to tackle complex legal issues, brought a sense of gravity to the proceedings. The stakes were high, the eyes of the nation were watching, and the court's decision would have far-reaching implications, not just for Jet Airways, but for the entire Indian aviation industry. SBI, in its appeal, argued that the NCLAT had erred in approving the resolution plan without fully considering the bank's claims. They pointed to the massive debt Jet Airways had accumulated, a debt that dwarfed the airline's assets. The banks, having borne the brunt of this financial burden, demanded that their interests be prioritized. They argued that the resolution plan, in its current form, unfairly benefited the new investors at the expense of the creditors. The Supreme Court, in its deliberations, had to weigh the various competing interests at play. On one hand, the court recognized the need to revive Jet Airways, a once proud symbol of Indian aviation. A successful resolution, the court understood, would save thousands of jobs and send a positive signal to investors, both domestic and foreign. On the other hand, the court also recognized the legitimate claims of the creditors, particularly the banks, which had poured billions of rupees into keeping the airline afloat. The court's decision, expected soon, would have far-reaching implications. A ruling in favor of SBI could potentially derail the resolution process, pushing Jet Airways closer to liquidation. Such an outcome would be a major setback for the government's efforts to attract foreign investment and revive the country's struggling aviation sector. A ruling in favor of JKC, on the other hand, would pave the way for the airline's revival, albeit with significant concessions to the creditors. The fate of Jet Airways, once a symbol of India's soaring ambitions, remains shrouded in uncertainty. The Supreme Court's impending decision hangs over the airline like a Damocles sword, capable of delivering a fatal blow or offering a lifeline. The court's ruling will determine whether Jet Airways gets a chance to spread its wings once more, or if it's consigned to the hangar of failed airlines. The implications of this decision extend far beyond the fate of a single airline. It's a litmus test for India's insolvency resolution process, a system designed to provide a lifeline to struggling companies while protecting the interests of creditors. A favorable ruling for Jet Airways could signal to investors that India is serious about reviving its corporate sector, even if it means imposing haircuts on banks. Conversely, a negative ruling could spook investors, making them think twice before betting on India's corporate turnaround stories. The airline industry, grappling with its own set of challenges, is watching this case closely. A successful resolution could provide a template for other struggling airlines, offering a glimmer of hope in an industry battered by high fuel prices and cutthroat competition. However, a protracted legal battle, culminating in liquidation, could have a chilling effect on the industry, making investors wary of pouring money into airlines perceived as risky. Whatever the outcome, the Jet Airways saga is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked ambition and the importance of sound financial management. It's a story of hubris and hope, of soaring highs and crushing lows, a story that's yet to reach its final chapter. The Indian skies await, holding their breath, to see if Jet Airways will once again grace the clouds, or if its legacy will be forever grounded.